Story 1. This happened about 7 years ago. I'm male, 29, used to work in a store whose name sounds a lot like those police officers that ride in planes. On this particular day, I was at the register when a well-dressed guy and 3 women walked in, each taking a cart and starting to walk around and pick things out. I was known for my no-nonsense attitude at the register. If you threw money at me, gave me attitude, whatever, I'd give it right back. So when a coordinator came to me 30 minutes later and asked me to take the guy and his girls at my register, I already knew we were in for a fun time. They rolled up with 3 carts full of clothes, not just any stuff, but shoes and boots that cost $300, $800, expensive handbags, coats, and more. I'm just there thinking, oh dear. So they walk up, I start scanning. All the while these ladies are being unpleasant. Finally, I get through it all, and the total comes up to about $3,000. The guy reaches into his fancy coat and pulls out a wad of cash, all crisp $100 bills, and immediately I knew something was off. So I take the money and go to the machine to check it. The first bill doesn't pass, neither does the second. So I turn back around and tell the guy that I can't take the money. Before I even get a chance to fully explain, one of the women cuts me off and tells me to take the freaking money and do your job. Cue malicious compliance. I say, you know what? You got it. Let me get the manager so he can help. See, at our discretion, we can decline a form of payment. Say if 2 of your cards get declined, you have to use cash. If your cash doesn't pass, you have to use a card, or we can just tell you to leave. But if we suspect you're using fake money, we have to try and keep you there while we get the police. So I go to my manager, cash in hand, and tell him what's up. He goes to the office and checks the money. Now the guy is nervous, but just imagine his reaction when 2 police officers walk in and head straight for us. His horrified face made my day. The police take my statement, and next thing you know, all 4 of them are getting arrested. While one of the women is screaming and cursing at me, I tell her in the most innocent voice I can pull off, "You told me to do my job." Story 2. When I was young, high school age, I lived with my family in a middle upper class suburb. Everybody in the community got along, and for the most part, life there was quiet, peaceful, and enjoyable. That is, of course, for one major exception, the house next to mine, which was rented by Mr. Public Nuisance. Be it alcohol-fueled parties, police busts, or constant eviction notices, there was rarely more than a week that went by without some sort of police involvement. To put Mr. Public Nuisance into perspective, he would have failed to get a job being a dirtbag simply because he was overqualified. One fateful night, however, the neighborhood got even. It was about 11 p.m. on a spring night. My family and I were attempting to sleep, but the party bumping from the other side of the fence made sleep, or even clear thought, all but impossible. The police had already been called, volumes had been turned down, then turned back up again as soon as the police car had pulled around the corner. I crawled out of bed and made my way out to the living room. The front door was open, and my father was standing out front, in conference with the neighborhood pajama committee. They dispersed, and my father came back inside. I asked him what was happening. "Just be quiet and follow me." I followed my father out of the house into the backyard, where he opened up the valves for our hoses. They bulged under the pressure. He handed me one of the nozzles and whispered, "On my command." We both walked over to the fence and took aim. My father waited, checking his watch, until finally his arm dropped. Streams of water appeared from all around and jettisoned into the troublemaker's yard. Sounds of drunken partying turned to screams of shock. Now would probably be a good time to note that the neighborhood water supply was winter runoff, which usually sat just above freezing temperatures. In the cool spring air, it was probably quite uncomfortable. Screams of shock were eventually overpowered by a yell of rage. The troublemaker had lost it and was screaming half-slurred expletives. We shut the water off, and somebody yelled back, "Sorry, thought it was the dog." A few minutes later, the neighborhood pajama committee had reconvened and were giggling among each other. Mr. Public Nuisance was standing in front of his house, continuing to yell at the top of his lungs. At that moment, a police car pulled around the corner. Long story short, Mr. Public Nuisance was taken to jail on charges of providing alcohol to minors, indecent exposure, lewd acts with a girl under the age of 18, and a slew of other alcohol-related charges. What a night. Never underestimate the pajama committee. Story 3. This happened a few years ago. My fiancée at the time, now wife, was driving around looking for dresses for her bridesmaids to wear for the wedding. We had been going from place to place looking for something she liked, but had no luck. We had just finished leaving David's Bridal and were leaving the plaza. It had been raining a lot, so the roads were slick. As I reached the intersection of where the plaza met the road to turn out, another car came turning in. Unfortunately, he didn't brake soon enough and skidded into the front end of the driver's side. Thankfully, everyone was okay. We got out of our cars and looked at the damage. His car, of course, was completely unharmed, and mine had a minor dent. He looked about 45-ish and had his son in the car with him. We exchanged names and phone numbers. He let me know he was on the way to work, and I told him we were just wedding shopping. I was 22 at the time and very naive as to what to do in case of an accident. He told me that we both seemed pretty busy and that we should just handle it ourselves since we were both busy. We didn't call the police by mistake, and he told me to get the damage looked at to see what it would cost. I took the car in 2 days later, and they quoted me $100 for the bumper to be replaced. I texted him, and he told me he would be getting scholarships in 2 months when he went back to school and would be able to pay me in cash then. I again naively told him that was fine. A week later, I followed up with him about another estimate I got, which was lower than the original $900, but I got no response. I texted him again and again for the next few days and nothing. At this point, I realized he had bailed. I came up with a plan to find him. All I had was his name, a now useless phone number, and a general area of where he worked. I searched for him on Facebook and was pretty sure I found him. I searched under his family members and saw what looked to be his son. My soon-to-be sister-in-law was 16 and looked about the same age as his son. I decided to go full-on sleuth and go undercover. I used her Facebook and changed her last name to match theirs. I then messaged the son and told him that I thought we might be cousins. I asked him some questions about his dad, like name and his job, and told him that my mom said I have an uncle down there by that name and worked at this guitar shop. He answered yes, that was his dad's name, and told me the name of the place where his dad worked. I was so relieved I was making progress. The next day, I drove back up near the accident and found where the man worked. I found his car and took pictures of his license plate. I then took all the info I had and went to the courthouse. I filled out paperwork and handed it to the clerk. The clerk told me they could either mail the form to his work address or, if I paid $25, I could have an officer hand deliver it. Of course, I paid the $25 just to embarrass him at his place of work. A few weeks later, we were summoned to the court to see if we could work things out before going to an actual hearing. He showed up, and we sat down with a mediator. She explained everything to all of us. I told him I didn't want to do this, but he stopped responding. He replied that his phone was stolen, so he had to get a new one in my mind. A phone being stolen doesn't equal changing your phone number. I knew he was lying. The mediator asked him to step outside. She talked to us and told us not to trust him because his story didn't make sense. The mediator invited him back inside, and we read over the terms I listed in the court documents. He was to pay $2,400. I charged him the original replacement cost, gas from driving back and forth, my time for doing all this work, and extra just for being a jerk. He said he would pay, but he didn't. So with that, I went to his job and took pictures of his car. I replied I didn't like that he hid my car. A few months later, he paid the full amount in cash and had to pay for our court costs as well. I sold the damaged car and took the cash he gave me to buy another car fully in cash. All in all, I benefited from it, but next time, I'll just call the police and save myself the headache. Story 4. This happened a few years ago. I was a manager bouncer at a very busy local bar, and it was my job to cut people off and/or bounce them if needed. I was in the process of cutting a woman off, and she became very belligerent. Since this was also a karaoke bar, she just so happened to be called to the stage while I was in the middle of cutting her off. She marched past me and stumbled onto the stage. I had the karaoke host cut her music off and continue on to the next singer. I went to the stage and escorted the lady off. To be clear, I did not touch her at this moment. I'm a broad 5'9" woman, and my boots add 1.5 inches. So this very short woman complied rather easily until she continued to argue with me after the fact. She didn't want to leave and ended up punching me in the face. I put my arms around her, picked her up, and headed towards the front door, at which time she grabbed the protective glass cover on the host stand and shattered it all over the ground. Once she was outside, she was yelling and screaming that I had assaulted her and threatened to call the police to have me arrested. I quickly grabbed a business card for her and said, "Our address is on the card, just so you make sure you call the police to the right place." They arrived and asked me who they needed to address. They arrested her. I'm certain they just put her in the drunk tank for the night. Story 5. So, 3 years ago, my husband and I set out to buy a house. We started in a rent-to-own situation because the house we wanted was available for that. The girl wanted to rent for a year, then sell. I don't know why she did, but it worked for us as the rent was really low for the area and allowed us to save up for the down payment. My brother-in-law was ready to co-sign on a loan, and this was a done deal for everyone. We signed a contract and we're good to go, right? No, this is pro-revenge here. Not everything works perfectly. About 6 months into the contract, she wanted a down payment. This is not right. You give the down payment to the bank, don't you? We declined. Then she needed money to help pay for her mom's shoulder surgery. She said she would take it off the total payment. We were shaky because of the first request and declined. We decided we were going to wait the 12 months because we were almost at a point financially where we didn't need my brother-in-law. Now she needed money because her dad had a stroke. We started looking at other houses because we could feel this was going downhill. We found one 2 houses down, way prettier, 400 square feet more, $10K less, but 10 years older. I loved it. It had 3 nooks. One in the kitchen dining area, one in the dining room, and one in the living room. We approached the owners but hadn't made an offer yet. She claimed we were not going to buy the house, so she was going to show it to other people. Okay, technically, she owns the house, showing it is her right. She showed the house to one person who made an offer and tried to evict us a month early as a result. We made an offer on the other house, and it was accepted. We sent her a letter from our lawyer for breach of contract. She flipped and asked us to work it out. We refused, and she sued us for failing to buy the house per the contract. We found out later the person she showed the house to and who made an offer was her Facebook friend. We could win easily, seeing as she defrauded us. Her parents owned the house, and she did not have a legal right or power of attorney to sign the contract. Her name was not on anything other than our rent-to-own contract. So her mom had the power to boot us at any time, and she did when they found out we were not going to buy it. After a rushed closing, we got out 2 days before the end of our eviction. Then the daughter had the nerve to sue us for breach of contract. She also tried to sue us for damage we documented before moving in. They sold the house for $15K less than the asking price. So we dragged that matter out. We demanded non-binding mediation. She didn't show up and got a judgment for $35K. She objected and demanded a jury trial. At this point, her lawyer fees were upwards of $20K. But he was a lawyer they had for her mom's business, not a real estate lawyer. We got it 3 days before the trial. Their lawyer was ready to do battle. Our lawyer went into a pretrial hearing and presented the documentation that she never had the legal right to sign the documentation at all, and the judge dismissed the case for standing. Life pro tip: get a lawyer who specializes in what you are trying to do, or at least one who is willing to do the research when discovery includes the request for power of attorney over real property. Okay, so per the comments, she didn't own the house. Her parents did. As such, she had no legal right to make a deal for sale unless she had power of attorney. She did not. After she sued us, we demanded mediation. We requested it be non-binding as was allowed in the contract because it gave both parties the ability to say no. This is not acceptable. We want a jury trial. We didn't bother to show up for the mediation because we already had her for defrauding us. The mediation granted her full request because we didn't show up. We objected to the settlement and demanded a jury trial. As a result, her lawyers prepped for 2 months, costing her a ton more in lawyer fees. 3 days before the trial, our lawyer presented evidence to the judge that she had no legal right to act as an agent to sell the property if she signed any agreement with us, and the whole case was tossed. She was on the hook for all her lawyer fees and took a $15K hit on the listing price of the house.